right, so here we have our drummer plugin in Kontakt playing back some MIDI, and obviously all of that is coming through this one instrument track in our case. Now, what if we want to split these drums out to separate outputs in our DAW so we can then mix them with our own plugins? That's what we're going to do here. Now, we are using Abbey Road Modern Drummer, but all of this applies to all of these other drum libraries as well. And it actually applies to, if you want to set up multis or whatever and set your output to different things up here, you can do it this way as well. So what we need to do is, of course, set up our outputs in Kontakt. So come up here, click this drop down and choose outputs. Something like this is what it's going to look like by default. What we need to do, of course, is come down here to our mixer. And if you've seen the definitive guide for the drummer series, you already know we can split these things out. This video is only focusing on how to get the drums out. I'm not going to cover everything in here. So for our kick, make sure we choose settings. Here's the output. It's the master. If we check in here, we don't have any other outputs. ST1, stereo 1 is indeed the master. Even if I switch it, kick is still coming out of stereo 1. So what we need to do is create new outputs here in Kontakt before our drummer plugin will actually notice those. And we actually have to create these before we even load the drummer series. But you'll see that here in a minute. First, we need to know how many channels do we need. So in this case, our close mics, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Make sure we have our kit mics here. 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 channels. Now you need to figure out, do you want some things going on the same track? Maybe you want all your toms on the same track. Maybe you want the clap and the chop on the same track. Maybe you want both of your overheads on the same track and both of your room on the same track. That's going to determine how many tracks we create. But we're going to go ahead and create, 13. So come down here to where it says outputs. Click the plus icon. Now up here in our outputs, the quantity is how many we need. We can click and drag or double click in here, type in 13 in this case. And then down here, number of channels. That actually means how many channels per track. So 2 would be a stereo channel. If I chose 1, it's a mono channel. Now, should you use mono or stereo channels? Well, usually a kick, a snare, a hi-hat, a tom, those are going to be single channels, meaning mono channels, right? Because microphones are indeed mono, right? However, native instruments themselves, they do suggest using stereo channels, all right? And this is consistent for all of the drummer series. So we're going to do what they say. You could indeed use mono channels if you want. Let's go ahead and create 13, in this case, stereo channels. So we have that on 2. Now our sound card, our host output, you can select this in here. Sometimes it doesn't actually ascend correctly, but let's go ahead and just choose that for now. Ascend output assignment, make sure that's checked. Delete existing channels. Don't do that because we want this ST1 to stay there. Make this your default configuration. We do need to do this, but we'll do it later on in this case, right? So click OK. And right there, as you can see, it didn't actually ascend properly. It takes us to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 9, 10, 9, 10, 9, 10, right? So that's not proper. Let me come back here and just to show you, we'll do 2 or 3. This time we'll do number of channels 1. So mono tracks, just to show those, hit OK. Now, there have been some people who complain whenever they use mono tracks, which you can see here, and they use those in conjunction with the stereo tracks, sometimes they have problems. So again, you can test out mono tracks, especially for things like your close mics, kick, snare, hi-hat, right? You could try to route those to mono tracks if that works better for you. But for things like the overhead stereo, obviously you would want that to be on a stereo channel. Okay. So now if we come in here, we're still not seeing anything, right? And if we come in here to Pro Tools, here's a stereo audio channel. We look here at plugin and we still don't have those new outputs, right? And by the way, I'm using come up in here, the multi-channel plugin of Kontakt. In this case, Kontakt 5 AAX. I'm using the stereo version. This will be similar for other DAWs and other formats like VST and AU. But let's come back down here to our outputs and make sure they're set up correctly because we're going to have to close down Pro Tools before Pro Tools will actually notice these. So stereo 2, 3, 4, 5 are set correctly down here in our output. Okay, up to 9, 10. But for 6 here, just click down here where the routing is, brings up our physical output. Click this channel, and we want this to actually be 11, 12. But as you see, I choose something. Now it's changed to 10. I don't have anything else down here. Not really a problem. Let's just say okay for now. Okay. And before we close anything down, use this drop down here where it says presets and batch configuration. Okay. Come down here. We can save the current output section state as default 4, and we can choose all formats, the standalone version of Kontakt, the VST version of Kontakt, or the AAX version of Kontakt. Now, in my experience, choosing all formats seems to work best. Just choosing the AAX plugin doesn't always remember that setting for whatever reason. So I usually choose for all formats. So like that. Okay. Now we have to close down Pro Tools, not just the session, but all of Pro Tools. So let's go ahead and close this down. We'll save everything. And then we'll launch it again. Then we'll choose that session, reopen it, and Kontakt comes up just the way we left it. Now if we come down here in Pro Tools and actually check this here, come down to plugin, Kontakt, now we can actually see those inputs down here. Of course, we still have a bit of a problem, don't we? Because we weren't able to actually set up all of these outputs down here, right? So for example, stereo 6 is going out 10 and 10, right? This is going out 9, 10. This is going out 9, 10. So for example, if we just took our kick and we use the drop down, now we actually have this in here, and we came to say stereo 8 for the kick, right? It's coming out of 9, 10 in this case, which means over here in Pro Tools, if I set this up to, we'll say stereo 8, monitor that, not getting anything there. Of course, if I routed this to stereo 2 and then did the same thing here, then we should get that input right here in Pro Tools. So we have a bit of a problem. Not a huge deal, but I just want you to be aware of that. So let's make sure 3 works properly here. Routing the kick to 3. It's coming through 3. Hit into Pro Tools, plug in here, and 3. Monitor that track. And that's working, okay? So we have a bit of a problem up here because we have multiple channels with 9 and 10 in this case. So stereo 5, come here and check it. Stereo 5. That works, right? But again, I just want to be clear with this and thorough with this. Put that on 7, put this on 7. Nothing. All right. So we know the problem. Down here, you can see output 1 and 2, output 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10, 10, 9, 10, 9, 10. Not going to work, right? So again, click on here, come back up here now, and now we actually have more output options. You have to actually expose the outputs of Kontakt whenever Pro Tools is launching. If it's not exposed, then you're not going to see it. Okay, so that's you don't need to know about that. But the point is, come in here now, and now we have to figure out what is what. Okay, so stereo 1, 2, that's going to be 1, 2. Stereo 2, 1, 2 is going to be 3, 4. Right. So if I choose stereo 2, 1, plug in output number 3. Right. We can see that, right? Okay. So again, we're on stereo 6, 9, 10. We need 11, 12. So what we need to do again, click here. Let's come down to about 6, 1, I think. That's 11. And that's 12. Now we can go to the next channel here, like that, and do the same thing. So again, come in here and figure out which is the correct outputs, the plugin outputs. So plugin 13, plugin 14. And we can click OK on both of these. Of course, we have to close Pro Tools again, but now we have 9 and 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Let's do the same thing here. Now we need, that's 15, 8 right there will be 16. Very good. Then for 9, same stuff here, right there. And we're on 9, correct? Right there. So 17, 18, select that. Very good. Then we still have these right here. Same stuff. There's 19 and 20. I'll just use my arrow right here. 28. Okay. Now we could also use our mono channels here if we wanted to. We could route those to different outs. So route this to 29, which again, we can use mono channels if you want. I'm just showing you the stereo method because that's actually what Native Instruments recommends, okay? And come down here, mono 16, next one here, come down, and mono 17. So we have 29, 30, 31 there. Okay. Now we still can't actually use this yet. Okay, I could actually put the kick out mono, trigger it. Here we are coming through. And don't worry about this coming through ST1, stereo 1 or the master, because of course we still have other stuff like our, our microphones going out through the main so far. But now guess what we need to do? We need to shut down Pro Tools again. But before we do that, let's come in here and we can save this here default state for all formats again. Okay. Now, before I close down things here, you do have the option to actually name these channels something else. So if I wanted to name this channel Kick, I can name it Kick if I want to. And then when you come into Pro Tools here, you'll actually see Kick in your list. The problem with doing that is if you save this as your default output and you're using things other than the drummer series, and you want to make use of your multiple outputs that you're already going to have set up as your, as your default, you're going to see Kick in the drop down here as well. Okay. And that won't really make sense if you have a piano loaded up, some strings loaded up, then you're going to be seeing Kick. Of course, you could rename it here in Kontakt, but again, the problem would be it's still going to say Kick here in Pro Tools. You're going to have to save that as your default and shut down Pro Tools and go over and over and over again. So it's just usually easier to leave it to ST, just so it's sort of generic. For this track here, I will name it Kick, just so you can see what I mean, okay? Name that Kick. We can name this one too if we want. Snare, just as an example, because these mics here, our close mics, those should technically be mono, even though Native Instruments does recommend, again, they do recommend that you use stereo channels. So once again, down arrow right there, save current output, all formats. Okay. Another thing you can do, by the way, is you can save this as a preset. So save output section preset as, which we'll do in a minute here, but I want to clean things up first. So we've saved that. Guess what we have to do? Yep, that's right. Close down Pro Tools again. And then launch it again. Okay, so launch that session. Again, Pro Tools has to have all of that stuff exposed before it can even offer you, the outputs, even within Kontakt. As you saw there at the beginning, we had, like aux 1, 2, that's all we had out. But after we added the channels, closed down Pro Tools, reopened Pro Tools, then we actually had the amount of outputs that we want. Okay, so now we have all of this set up. We defaulted it out. Guess what's going to happen now? So again, here's a stereo channel audio track, okay, in Pro Tools. Use our input, come down to plugin and Kontakt, and now we can see all of those channels, okay? And they should all work properly. So if we go to 8 as our input right now, monitor that channel here in our drummer series. Just do the kick, and we'll put this on stereo 8. So now, right here, just so you can see it, we're getting that input finally into Pro Tools. Now we also have mono channels. Down here, kick, snare, and this MO 17 means mono 17. So I could put this out of the kick because it is named Kick. Will also be named Kick up here, Kick right there, and it will also be named Kick. So here's a mono track, input, plug-in right here. It will also be named Kick in here. So right here, Kontakt, Kick. You see all of our stereo channels are split. Stereo 9 left, stereo 9 right, so on and so forth, right? So just choose Kick here. And now, make sure I have this here. So we have our Kick routed to Kick. Here's the Kick, and it's coming in here at kick. Okay, let me monitor that actually. Okay, or we can put it back on the stereo. Okay, so again, you're free to use mono channels if you want. Native Instruments, again, does recommend stereo channels, and some people have reported problems and bugs when using mono and stereo channels. I just want you to be aware. I'm not telling you you have to use stereo. You don't. You can use mono for all of your close mics if you want, and that sort of makes a little more sense, at least in my opinion. But, you know, a lot of times I'll just use stereo channels just because it's a bit easier. All right, so we have all of this set up now. What do we need to do now? Well, we need to create the tracks in Pro Tools, right? So Control-Shift-N, I'm on Windows, by the way. And since we're using stereo, we'll choose stereo. I believe we had 13 tracks. That's, again, stereo audio tracks. Create all of those. So here is all of our tracks. Now, while they're still highlighted, we could, of course, come in here and, you know, select them and highlight them again. While they're all selected, I'm going to hold down Alt and Shift and Control, in my case, or Command on Mac. Use my down arrow there. I can release my buttons now. Go to Plugin, and I'll choose this top channel. Boom. So now, as you can see, through all of our selected channels, it incremented our input. So I don't have to come in here manually now and change this to 3. And then this one here, change it to 4, right? By using that Alt, Control, and Shift, it will increment those for me, right? But again, if you don't do that, not a problem. Just come in here and make sure you route everything to the appropriate output. Now it would be good housekeeping to come in here and start naming things, right? So I'll go through here and name stuff. So now everything is labeled here in Pro Tools. I could, of course, color these, you know, different colors if I want. There we go. And then we have to route these right here in our drummer series. So we don't actually need to see this necessarily, our output. You can always close that right here if you want. But we'll leave it open for now. So again, here's my kick tab. Again, we're on the mixer. We're on the mixer tab here. Okay, so kick, settings. I'm going to put this to 0.2. Choose my snare. Leaves me on my settings tab. And just put that on 3. And I'm going to come through here, put this on 4. Just consulting over here exactly how I have things named. Put this on 5. I'm going to go through this here and get these all routed to the proper tracks. Okay, there we go. So now all of our drums should be properly routed here in our mixer here in this case, Abbey Road Modern Drummer, and here in Pro Tools. So if I play something in here, we can see it's coming through. Obviously, we're not going to hear it yet in Pro Tools. At least not much. We still have stuff coming out, keep in mind, up here, right? We still have some of the master coming through up here. Right, we have sins on our snare, for example, and that's being sent, of course, through the reverb, and then, you know, to the master. If I turn the sin down on the snare, right, just getting a tiny little bit coming through here. Turn that sin down. But as you can see down here, all of our channels are routed properly. All right. So let's head over here again into Pro Tools. I still have all of these tracks selected. So I can hold down Alt and Shift. That means all selected, and just choose the monitor icon. So all of those are monitored. Again, you know, we could actually use aux tracks if you don't want to record this. You just want to affect things, and then you can bounce it out that way if you don't want to actually record it, but probably a good idea to actually record it, okay? So now, if I play back our sequence up here, it's our overheads, right? It's our kick, our snare. All of that stuff coming out. Now what you need to be aware of, here in the mixer, okay, within our drummer series, All right. If I pan, say the kick, let me go to kick here. We'll play back again. If I pan the kick in here, we're going to get that pan over here as well in Pro Tools into what we actually record. So what you might want to do is put all of these down the center. You don't have to. You can if you want. Put them all down the center and then record. That way you might also want to default everything in the mixer here. You also want to consider your plugins, okay, or your, I should say your effects in our drummer series as well, okay? So again, I'll play back. We're on the EQ for the kick. If I boost this, right, we're going to record that as well. Now we're not recording the reverb. So I put a lot of send on that kick, right? I solo just the kick. We don't hear that reverb. Okay, the reverb is coming through the master here, right? Okay, so keep that in mind. You probably won't want that anyway because you're going to record everything and use your own plugins. So now we can use our own plugins. Just be aware of your settings in here, your effect settings. You might want to come in here and turn everything off for each of your drums. You don't have to. If you have sort of a premix in here, that's fine. And you can, of course, combine that with your own plugins as well. But that's basically how you do it. So now what I'll do is let me hold down Alt. It's going to take everything off of monitor. Again, I have all of these selected. So I'm going to do a Alt Shift and click my recording button there. Make sure those are all set and only those are set. Very good. We still have our MIDI here on our track. So now we can record here in Pro Tools and get that spit out, of course, into Pro Tools, just as if we had recorded, real live drums. Back here to Kit, make sure those are on. They are. So let's go ahead and record, just as you normally would. Record. Right there, you can see it. Okay. And we'll stop the recording. Now we can close this down. I can mute Kontakt there. I'll hold down Alt and take all of those off of Record Enable. And now I can play back just what we recorded. All right. So pretty dry sound overall. Just the hats, just the snare. Of course, there's some bleed in that snare, which you can, of course, adjust within our drummer series there. Just the tom here. Okay. So there you go, man. That is how you actually record your drums here in Pro Tools by splitting them out of your drummer series there in Kontakt. So just the overhead, stereo, the mono. Of course, put whatever plugins on these that you want to use, not just native instrument plugins, but stuff from maybe Waves or SoundSpot, Plugin Alliance, Abbey, whatever you want, and mix however you want. Okay, so that's basically everything you need to know here. Let me take this off here. We can still hear stuff coming through the master, of course. Right. So you can combine that sound that you're getting from your instrument track whenever you bounce everything out. If you want, you don't have to. Again, you can always mute it. You could even completely take Kontakt off, or I could disable it completely, whatever you want to do. Obviously, you're still going to hear your drums down here, right? Okay. Just mention one more thing here. So come in here to the mixer and don't forget, see settings tab, don't forget we could use mono channels. I want to emphasize that you can use your mono channels. It's absolutely fine. So if I want to change that to kick down here, absolutely fine because we already have it set up. Then down here, actually Control Shift in mono track, grab it right here. It's right there. You could call this, Call this kick M for mono. Very good. Just set this up here and choose kick. And let me pull this up top. So it's right next to our stereo track. We'll go ahead and record, enable that. All right. I'll just hit F12 there to record. Mute this track. Okay, long enough. Take that off of record enable. Let me close down Kontakt for now. So right there is our kick on the mono versus on the stereo there. So to hear those, right? Take that off solo, put that one on mute. Come up here, mute that. One more time with the stereo. Okay, so again, nothing wrong with using your mono channels. I've already showed you how to set them up. The reason, again, we did it with stereo was just because that's what, once again, Native Instruments does. They do recommend that. So there you go. Now, lastly here, one other thing we could do if you want. Come back to our output up here, okay? If we like this setting, we have it as default, but maybe we don't want to use it all the time, right? This looks pretty good to me. Now, what I might want to do is set up all mono channels, right? And save that, or set up, channels named something. But what I'm going to do first here, I'm going to select this, get rid of it. Yeah. Okay, select this one. The minus to get rid of it. Select this one here, the minus to get rid of it. Then I'm going to come in here. I'm going to save the output section preset as. I'm going to call this 14 stereo out. Okay. And we'll just save that. I'm also going to make sure I save current as the default for all formats. Okay. I didn't necessarily have to do that, but figured I would. Now, let's do something here. Call that one kick. Call this one snare. Call that hi-hat. I'll just go on like this. There we go. So now all of those are named. What I'm going to do this time, make sure you leave that stereo one there. Now I'm going to save this here as a preset as well. I'm going to call this the Abbey Road drummer. I might want to call it modern drummer or something like that, just so I know it's just for modern drummer, okay? I'm going to put ST on there because it's stereo. So I'll save that. And then I might come in here and try to batch function. Let's just clear all this. Okay. Then I'll come in here, call this st.1 because that's the standard naming convention. Then I'm going to save this as a preset. I'm going to call this default Kontakt output because that's exactly what it looks like. Save that. And then what I might want to do, right? I might want to set up a mono mix. Well, let's see. We need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So we'll say 11. And then single channel. We'll leave this output. Well, we don't want to choose anything there. Let's just take that off for now. And I don't want to delete anything or make it my default yet. Just hit OK. So there's all of our monos right there. Then I'm going to go plus, and now I need 2 stereos. So 2 stereos, that's fine. Okay, there we go. Now again, I could come in here and set this up and call this kick. I could call it snare, or you can leave it with these names here. So you have yourself a nice mono output preset. In fact, I will do that here. We have like 11 monos, 2 stereo. Save this if I want and call it 11 mono, 2 stereo. You can save that. And then I could come in here, call this kick, right? You get the idea. Snare, now we have this. I'm not going to worry about the outputs yet because as we know, we have different things depending on what it's like whenever we start, whenever we start Kontakt up. So again, I'm going to take this. I'm going to save this as a preset. I could name it Abbey Road Modern Drummer, or I could name it maybe just a basic mono drum outputs to stereo, just so I know, right? So then I have that saved. Okay, now what we can do makes it a little bit easier. Here are all of our presets down here now, okay? So we have what we just made, this mono drum output to stereo. Very cool. We're not quite ready for this yet because we still have to change, the outputs here. So we'll have to actually resave this file. But right now, close down Pro Tools. Open it back up again. Let's open that session. And now, if we look in here, what do we have? Okay, because we didn't save that as our default. So when we come in here to Pro Tools, we still have just that standard, outputs that we already had, right? Because these here is not what we wanted, right? So glad we did that actually. That just proves the importance of actually saving it as your default. So again, let's make sure we have that mono selected there. Very good. Make sure all those are okay. All right. And then make sure we save this as the default. And guess what happens now? That's all right. We close down Pro Tools again. And then we're going to reopen it. All right. Bada bing. And there it is. Open up that session again. And then come in here to a mono channel. And now these are named correctly. So kick, snare, hi-hat, tom, right? All of those. Now these are of course, the stereo channels there. But again, we need to come in here. And now we can actually select the proper routing pretty easily, right? So kick goes to kick. Okay. Come back here. Snare goes to snare. And this is much easier like this, isn't it? It's also great to save your preset because it makes it much faster. Again, we should save this again. And we got this one here. Overhead, we got room, right? Room stereo 1 and room stereo 2. Okay, so now what you want to do is make sure you save this as a preset. Again, with all this, all this proper routing. So this one was the mono output drums. I'm just going to select it again and save. It's going to overwrite it. So that should hopefully keep us from having to do this again. Hopefully. There are weird things in Kontakt that, sometimes that happens. But what we'll do now, just out of, habit, make sure we save it for all formats. If I came in here now, this is named plugin. And if we go to snare here, monitor that track. Let's go to snare here, and it's on snare there. Not going to get anything, right? Because we changed these outputs, right? Snare's on snare. Here's kick, here's snare. Just making sure all of this is set up correctly here. Okay. So once again, guess what we got to do? That's right. Close down Pro Tools again. Make sure one more time I have that for all formats and save it. Very good. Open it again. Okay. Open it again. Now this time it should actually work. And that's why we set up the presets. So that way we can, flip through them there, call them up, set that as default quickly, close down Pro Tools, open it back up, and everything should in that case work, right? So this now, plug in here, and we have snare selected, monitor that, and we're on the snare, and we still have snare right there. So now, if it still doesn't work, you might want to close down Abbey Road, and then load it up. I could use any of these, actually. They'll all work the same. All right. Make sure this is on here. So right now, I think it's stereo, the mixer, go to the kick, settings, put this out of kick, and get it out of the kick now. And we could make sure here in Pro Tools is a mono channel. Sometimes there are just little things that happen like that. Now it's coming through. Okay, very good. And do the same thing for the snare. Put this out of snare. Now it's actually coming out. By the way, all of this stuff applies to any library, not just the drummer series, by the way. So anything at all. All of this routing applies to everything. Okay, so you might want to set up something for action strikes, or maybe you have a multi of action strikes and rise and hidden, something from Kontakt, right? You could set up a bunch of different named channels like this, save it as a preset, and then, you know, save that as the current default state, close down Pro Tools. You get the idea, right? Much quicker that way. So again, now if I wanted to, we could create a bunch of mono channels, right? I could do, I think 11, right? 11 of those, and then 2 stereo. Boom. Then come through here, and I have everything selected. So Control-Alt-Shift in this case, and we'll just go ahead and start with kick. And that sets all of that up for me. Come down to the stereos. They're not going to be routed properly. And of course, do the same thing down here for the overhead stereo and the room stereo. I'm not going to go through this again. Now, in this case, we didn't load up the modern drummer, so some of these channels wouldn't be used, you know, exactly how they're named. So I have overhead 1, stereo, this is stereo, and this is stereo in this case. So I could route both of these overheads to, you know, the same channel if I wanted to there. Because again, this is our, you know, this is our mono mix preset that we made. So that's why I'm saying, you know, be careful whenever you name these things, because I have Tom 1, Tom 2, Tom 3, and Tom 4. Well, we only have 3 toms in here, right? Not a big deal, right? Just skip over this one here. But the naming in here is still going to say Tom 4, and there's not even a Tom 4. Whenever you're routing, whatever it is you're routing, you know, something to, okay? So you might want to leave these names generic. You might not, right? That's up to you. I just want you to be aware of that. It is easier to route the tracks, of course, once they're actually named. But then again, in Pro Tools, at least, it's kind of a pain to go back and forth. So you might want to set up some generic, you know, some generic output settings where it just says stereo and mono. So that way, like that. But again, now I could come in here, and if I have my stereo setting that I, you know, used previously, or maybe the default, I could choose the default right here. Now, of course, we can still use Kontakt. Okay. But our settings in here haven't changed. But at least this way, it'll be quicker to go back, because all I have to do is select that preset and then come back in here and make sure I set this as the default for all formats. And of course, that's right, close down Pro Tools again and open it back up. Okay, let's open this up again. And there we go. Our output section is just how we left it in here in Pro Tools. Now it's set up just how it is by default. Okay. So make presets of, you know, of all of this stuff, right? So this way I could come back here to the Abbey Road, which we already set up, right? Let's come in here to our mono drum output with 2 stereos. Okay. So those are set up pretty much correctly. There's some problems down here because of the way, again, because of the way Kontakt loaded up at the default state. When Pro Tools opened up, because those outputs weren't exposed, we weren't able to actually go in here, right, and see them. As you can see now, they say aux instead of having the name. So again, in this case, it would you'd have to come in here and save this as the default, close down Pro Tools, right, open it back up. But it is much faster, of course, to do it like this. So once again, I could do this, save this as the default, close down Pro Tools, right? Open it back up. Open that up, of course. And now, guess what? So it looks like that's set up correctly now. It just has to do with what's exposed in Kontakt, right? Whenever you actually load it as a plugin in Pro Tools during that initial startup there. So in this case, this was our Abbey Road. Close this here. This was our Abbey Road modern drummer. Throw this in here. Now everything should be set up correctly for us. Pretty quickly, you know. Got to shut down Pro Tools a couple times. Not that big of a deal. Head in here to settings. Bada bing. Kick. You get the idea. I'm not going to do it again because you get the idea. Snare. Okay. Hi-hat. So on and so forth. Then whenever you come in here to Pro Tools, let me just monitor that track. Hit my snare. Coming through here in Pro Tools. Again, this was our stereo, our Abbey Road Modern Drummer stereo preset. Okay, so make those presets. Make your mono presets too. Once again, you may not want to name things. You may not want to. You may want to also. Because, for this reason here, let me close this. Because as I mentioned, you know, this video applies to everything, right, in Kontakt here. Okay, so in this case here, just make sure we hit plus there. This is going out stereo 1. This here, we might want going out of stereo 2, but because I have it named kick, it's going to go out kick. That might be weird to set things up that way. So that's why I'm mentioning you might want to set up generic outputs, right? You might want to set up, come in here, for example, might want to set up a quantity of, 20 tracks, all stereo, and just leave them named ST, stereo 1, stereo 2, whatever. Or you might want to give them, sort of a generic names for, things like kick, snare, hi-hat, tom 1 up to tom 4, maybe even tom 5. Even if your current kit doesn't have 5 toms, you just want to have that in your template, so to speak, right? You can go ahead and set that up as a template and save that as a preset. Okay. So what you might want to do, just as an example, just set something up where there's a good amount, right? 24, 25, just hit OK. Of course, I want to get rid of all those first, but you could set all of these up, save that as a template, restart Pro Tools, do all of your routing in here, which I'm not going to go through again. Save your template again, just to make sure it's remembering the routing. Of course, don't forget setting the current as the default. You can do the AAX only, but again, in my experience, just choosing the AAX doesn't always work whenever you restart Pro Tools, and then you have to click all formats anyway and do it again. By the way, you can set all this stuff up. You can't do the routing, but you can set all this stuff up in the standalone version of Kontakt as well, and just have like basic templates, laid out. But in here, by the way, if I wanted to name this wood, I can name that wood, and up here in Kontakt, it will go ahead and change to wood. Okay, but over here in Pro Tools, it's not. Okay, so be aware of those differences. It won't show up here in Pro Tools as wood until I, close down Pro Tools and reopen it again. Of course, I would need to save this as the current default. Okay, if I just close it down now and open it without actually saving the default, it's not going to expose wood to Pro Tools. It's not going to expose wood to Pro Tools. Never expose your wood to Pro Tools. Okay, so that's pretty much everything you need to know in extreme depth for setting up multiple outputs here in Kontakt. There are other things we can do depending on what you have loaded up, right? With our batch functions, we can clear things out, rename, split the instruments right into the first, right? We can do that. Okay, so to wrap it up, once again, make sure you make some presets, okay? It's going to be much, much quicker. Save your default Kontakt state, makes it quicker to go back to just, select it like that. And then, of course, set it as your default. Close everything down, open it back up, and you're good to go with the default. And then set up I would just say set up a generic, sort of a generic drum preset. Add yourself some extra mono channels and some extra stereo channels. Of course, depending on what you're using. If you're using all mono channels, give yourself a couple extra monos and a couple extra stereos. If you're setting yourself up a fully stereo rack, give yourself 2, 3, 4 extra stereo channels, just in case you load up, Studio Drummer or something, and there's, an extra output that you hadn't accounted for in maybe, 50s Drummer or something. Okay. So set all those up. Be much quicker now to just choose my 14 stereo out. I'm all set up. I'm ready to go. Now in this case, it should actually work here in Pro Tools, just because the routing is exposed rather properly. But again, after you set it as the default, right? Close down Pro Tools. Open it back up. Open this back up. There we go. Get rid of all this stuff here. find a drummer series here. Any of them will work. Maybe Studio Drummer. Grab the session kit. Throw it in here. We have our generic stereo preset in here, as we can see. Just name stereo 1, stereo 2, so on and so forth. To the mixer settings, and then start routing things out. Again, avoid stereo 1 because that's the actual master that's coming out of your instrument track, okay? Then you'd go through here, set everything up. And of course, set up your tracks here in Pro Tools. So right here we have 2, which is our kick. This is our snare right here, which is on 3. And that's good enough for what we want. Monitor those tracks. Again, we're using stereo. You can use mono if you want. There you go. And then just, of course, you can record because, again, we still have MIDI up there. Pull this down. Take it right there. And back down here. Make sure those are record enabled. And record. Good enough for what we want. Get this out of the way. Right there, we just recorded that short section. Right. Now we're ready to go ahead and mix however you want with whatever plugins that you want, just like you had recorded a live drum kit. Okay. One last time, be aware of the effects that are on your individual drums, because those, of course, will come through. That is how you route out all of the drummer series, individual drums in Kontakt, and then again out into Pro Tools and record each of those drums just as if you had recorded a live kit.